Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master bedroom, blurring the glittering skyline of Seoul into a weeping mess of gray and charcoal. The storm had been raging for hours, mirroring the devastation inside the room. It was a ruin. The air was thick with the scent of stale whiskey and the metallic tang of regret. The mirror, once pristine, lay in thousands of shards across the expensive hardwood floor, reflecting fractured images of the man sitting in the center of the debris. Maru sat on the floor, his back resting against the frame of the bed he had shared with her only 48 hours ago. He looked nothing like the Dragon of Seoul. His dress shirt was unbuttoned, stained with liquor, and his eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles that spoke of a sleepless, haunted purgatory. He held the crumpled photograph in his hand, his thumb tracing the image of Nia's face over and over again, as if he could change the reality of it through sheer will. Every time he looked at it, the knife in his gut twisted deeper. The betrayal tasted like ash. He had opened his fortress to her. He had let her pass the walls he had built over a lifetime of violence and blood. He had let himself believe, for the first time in his wretched existence, that someone could look at him and see the man, not the monster. And she had been a spy. She had been working for Kang. The thought made him want to burn the city down, but the only thing burning right now was his own soul. He took another long, burning pull from the bottle of whiskey, seeking oblivion, but finding only sharper memories. He remembered the way she smelled like vanilla and rain. He remembered the way she had looked at him at the dinner table, trusting him to protect her. He remembered the sound of her voice begging him to believe her as he threw her out like garbage. Get out. The memory of his own roar made him flinch. He had terrified her. He had seen the light go out in her eyes, replaced by a fear that would haunt him until his dying day. A soft, hesitant knock on the open door broke the oppressive silence. Maru didn't look up. He didn't have the energy to command anyone to leave. It's me, cousin. Junwoo stepped into the room, picking his way carefully over the broken glass and shredded feathers of the mattress. He looked fresh, rested, dressed in an impeccable slate-gray suit that seemed to mock the chaos surrounding them. He stopped a few feet away, looking down at Maru with an expression of carefully constructed sympathy. You need to get up, Maru, Junwoo said softly, his voice smooth like oil. You're letting this destroy you. Look at this place. Look at yourself. She wasn't worth this. Maru didn't answer. He just stared at the photo. Was she worth the hollow ache in his chest that felt like dying? She played you, cousin, Junwoo continued, stepping closer. It happens to the best of us. You were lonely. You let your guard down. Kang saw an opening and he sent a pretty face to exploit it. She found your weaknesses, Maru, but she's gone now. You cut out the cancer before it could kill you. You should be proud of that. Maru listened to the words, letting them wash over him. They should have been comforting. They should have validated his anger. But they felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. He looked at the photo again, really looked at it. He had spent hours staring at Nia's face, at the damning evidence of her handing that envelope to Kang. But this time, his eyes drifted past her. He looked at the background. It was a busy street, blurred by the long-range lens. There was a shop window in the distance, reflecting the chaotic lights of the city. In the reflection of that window, there was a digital billboard. It was tiny, barely a smudge of pixels, but Maru knew his city. He knew every street corner, every surveillance angle, and every advertisement. The billboard was displaying a ticker for a tech summit. Maru squinted, bringing the photo inches from his face. The whiskey fog in his brain cleared instantly, replaced by a cold, sharp dread that froze his blood. The date on the billboard ended in a 4. His heart stopped. The breath trapped in his lungs turned to ice. The timestamp in the corner of the photograph, the stamp that proved Nia had met Kang 2 days before she was hired, claimed the year was current. But the billboard in the background, that summit had happened last year. This photo wasn't taken last week. It wasn't taken this month. It was an old photo of someone who looked like Nia, or perhaps it was Nia from years ago, digitally altered, pasted into a context that didn't exist. It was a forgery. A high-quality fake designed to fool a man blinded by jealousy. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The room spun. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had committed a sin. He had thrown the innocent woman he loved out onto the streets, defenseless, alone, right into the path of his enemies based on a lie. Maru looked up slowly. Junwoo was still watching him, that faint, sympathetic smile plastered on his face. But now, through the lens of the truth, Maru saw it for what it was. It wasn't sympathy. It was victory. It was the smile of a man who had successfully manipulated a king into beheading his own queen. Maru stood up. He moved so fast the whiskey bottle slipped from his fingers and shattered against the wall, the sound exploding like a gunshot. "What is it?" Junwoo asked, taking a step back, his smile faltering as he sensed the sudden, terrifying shift in the air. Maru didn't speak. He couldn't. If he opened his mouth, he would scream. He walked past Junwoo, his shoulder slamming into his cousin's chest hard enough to send him stumbling, and stormed into the hallway. "Mrs. CHOI." The roar shook the foundations of the mansion. It wasn't a call, it was a summons from hell. Downstairs, Maid scattered in terror, dropping cleaning supplies. A moment later, Mrs. Choi appeared at the bottom of the grand staircase, her face pale as a sheet, her hands trembling violently in her apron. "Sir," she whispered, looking up at the man descending the stairs like an avalanche of dark fury. Maru stopped in front of her, his breathing ragged, his eyes wild. He shoved the crumpled photo into her face. "Who gave this to you?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a lethal, vibrating growl. "Who put it in my room? Who told you to say nothing?" Mrs. Choi's eyes darted past him to the top of the stairs, where Junwoo was now standing, gripping the railing, his face draining of color. She looked back at Maru, tears spilling over her cheeks. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. I found it, sir, on the pillow." "Don't lie to me," Maru shouted, slamming his hand against the wall. Plaster cracked under his fist. "If you lie to me now after what I've done to her, I will forget you have served this family for 20 years. Who?" Mrs. Choi sobbed, falling to her knees on the marble floor. "I was scared. He said he would fire me. He said he would ensure I never worked in Seoul again. He said he would hurt my son." "Who?" Maru asked, the words slicing through the air. Mrs. Choi pointed a trembling finger up the stairs. "Master Junwoo. I saw him go into your room with a bag. I saw him shred the uniform. I wanted to tell you, sir, I swear, but you were so angry. I was terrified." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. Maru turned slowly to look up the stairs. Junwoo wasn't smiling anymore. His mask had shattered. He looked small. He looked like a child who had been caught playing with matches while the house burned down around him. Maru didn't scream. He didn't run up the stairs. He just looked at his cousin, and in that look, Junwoo saw his own death written in ink and blood. "Where is she?" Maru asked. Junwoo swallowed hard, backing away from the railing. "It doesn't matter, Maru. It's too late. She's gone." "Where is she?" Maru repeated, taking the first slow step up. Junwoo turned and ran. He sprinted toward the guest wing, his footsteps frantic against the floor, heading for the back exit. Maru didn't chase him. He didn't need to run. He was the dragon. He controlled the ground they walked on. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers flying across the screen as he dialed his head of security. "Lock down the grounds," Maru ordered, his voice devoid of humanity. "No one leaves, no one enters, and find Nia. Ping her phone, access the city grid, check every camera in Seoul. If you don't find her in the next hour, don't bother coming back." He hung up and stood alone in the foyer of his empty, cold mansion. The guilt crashed over him then, a wave of nausea and self-hatred so potent it nearly brought him to his knees. He had failed her. He had promised to be her sanctuary, and instead, he had been her executioner. He had driven her away because of his own insecurity, his own inability to trust. "I'm coming, Nia," he whispered to the empty air, the words a prayer and a vow. "I'm coming." Miles away, on the outskirts of the city, the rain fell in sheets, turning the neon lights of the cheap motel sign into blurry streaks of red and blue. Nia sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror across the room. She looked hollow. Her eyes were swollen almost shut, red-rimmed from crying until her tear ducts were dry. She had spent the last 24 hours in a daze of misery. She had replayed the scene in the bedroom 1,000 times. The look on Maru's face, the transition from love to icy hatred, was etched into her eyelids. It hurt more than the hunger gnawing at her stomach. It hurt more than the fear of having no money and nowhere to go. She had given him everything. She had let him claim her, body and soul, and he had thrown her away without even letting her speak. She couldn't stay here. The motel was cheap, but her cash was running out. She needed to get out of Seoul. She needed to go somewhere where the name Maru didn't mean anything, somewhere she could disappear and try to stitch her heart back together. She stood up, her legs heavy, and grabbed her small bag. It contained only the dress she had left in, a few toiletries she had bought at a convenience store, and the crushing weight of her memories. She walked out into the relentless rain. The cold water soaked her instantly, plastering her hair to her face, but she didn't care. She kept her head down, walking toward the bus station a few blocks away. The streets were empty, the storm driving everyone indoors. A black van screeched around the corner, splashing dirty water onto the sidewalk. Nia flinched, stepping back toward the brick wall of an alley, expecting it to pass. But the van didn't pass. It slammed on its brakes, the tires squealing against the wet asphalt. The side door slid, open with a heavy metallic rasp. Nia turned to run, her instincts screaming, but she was too slow. Two men jumped out, wearing dark raincoats. One grabbed her arm, spinning her around. She opened her mouth to scream, to fight, but a heavy hand clamped over her mouth, stifling the sound. She kicked, clawed, dug her nails into the man's wrist, but he was too strong. They dragged her toward the open maw of the van. Inside, sitting in the shadows, was a man she recognized. It wasn't Maru. It was Kang, the rival boss whose arm Maru had broken at the poker game. He was wearing a sling, his face twisted into a cruel, triumphant grin that made her blood run cold. "Hello, sweetheart," Kang crooned. And sitting next to him, looking breathless and pale, his suit damp from his escape, was Junwoo. "Get her in," Junwoo snapped, looking nervously out the back window. "He's going to know. He's going to track her phone. Move." Nia was shoved inside, stumbling over the metal floor. The door slammed shut, sealing her in darkness and the smell of men and fear. Kang leaned forward, grabbing a handful of her wet hair and yanking her head back. She cried out, tears springing to her eyes. "So this is the dragon's treasure," Kang sneered, inspecting her face. "Maru broke my arm for touching you. I wonder what he'll do when I send him pieces of you in a box." Nia stared at him, trembling, but she found a spark of anger beneath the fear. She spat in his face. Kang laughed, wiping the saliva away slowly. "Feisty, I like that. It makes breaking you more fun." Junwoo's phone rang. The sound was loud and jarring in the confined space. He looked at the screen, and the color drained from his face entirely. "It's him," Junwoo whispered, his hand shaking. "Answer it," Kang ordered. "Put it on speaker. Let him hear her fear." Junwoo's thumb hovered over the screen. He took a shaky breath and pressed answer. "Junwoo." Maru's voice filled the van. It wasn't loud. It wasn't shouting. It sounded like the voice of a dead man walking. It was terrifying in its calmness. "You're too late, cousin," Junwoo said, his voice cracking. "She's with us, and she looks very tempting." There was a pause. A silence so heavy it felt like the air pressure in the van dropped. "If you touch her," Maru said softly, "I will peel the skin off your bones. I will keep you alive for days, Junwoo. I will make you beg for hell, and I will not grant it to you." Junwoo looked at Kang, fear visible in his eyes. He had unleashed a monster he couldn't control. "Bring her to the shipyard," Maru continued. "Warehouse 4. I'm coming alone. If I see anyone else, if I see one police officer or one guard, I burn the city down." The line went dead. The shipyard was a desolate graveyard of rusting metal and rotting wood, sitting on the edge of the dark, churning ocean. The rain hammered down on the corrugated tin roof of Warehouse 4, creating a deafening drumbeat that masked the sound of the world outside. Inside, the air smelled of salt and rust. Nia was tied to a metal chair in the center of the vast, empty space. Her lip was split where Kang had backhanded her for struggling, and her dress was torn at the shoulder, but she was alive. Kang and Junwoo stood near her, flanked by 6 armed men. They were waiting. The large metal doors of the warehouse groaned against the wind. Everyone raised their guns, aiming at the entrance. But the doors didn't open. Instead, the skylight 30 feet above them shattered inward. Glass rained down like deadly confetti. A figure dropped from the shadows, landing in a crouch on top of a shipping container. It was Maru. He didn't look human. He was dressed in tactical black, soaking wet, his hair plastered to his forehead. He held a gun in each hand. He didn't pause. He didn't hesitate. He opened fire. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Maru moved with a fluidity that was mesmerizing and terrifying. He jumped from the container, rolling as he hit the floor, bullets sparking off the concrete around him. He took out 2 men before he even stood up. Kang roared orders, firing blindly, but Maru was a ghost in the rain. He weaved through the maze of crates, closing the distance. He wasn't fighting for territory. He wasn't fighting for pride. He was fighting for his heart, and that made him unstoppable. He was a force of nature, a hurricane of violence tearing through anyone who stood between him and the woman he loved. He reached the center circle. Kang stepped out, aiming his gun at Nia's head. "Stop," Kang screamed. "Stop or I paint the floor with her brains." Maru froze. He stood 20 feet away, his chest heaving, his guns raised. His eyes locked onto Nia. When he saw the blood on her lip, a muscle in his jaw jumped, and the tattoo on his neck seemed to writhe with the tension of his cords. "Drop the guns, Maru," Kang yelled, pressing the barrel into Nia's temple. Maru slowly lowered his weapons. He placed them on the floor and kicked them away. "Let her go, Kang," Maru said, his voice steady. "This is between us." Nia looked at him. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the raw terror that he tried to hide behind the mask of the boss. He had come for her. After everything, he had come alone, unarmed, ready to die for her. Junwoo stepped out from behind Kang, holding a gun of his own. His hands were shaking violently. "Look at him," Junwoo sneered, his voice high and hysterical. "The great dragon. You look pathetic, Maru, all for a maid. You threw your empire away for her." Maru didn't look at his cousin. He kept his eyes on Kang. "You have 3 seconds to step away from her." Kang laughed. "Or what? You're unarmed, you're dead." 1. Maru took a step forward. 2. Kang tightened his finger on the trigger. Nia didn't wait. She wasn't going to be the damsel who watched her lover die. She twisted her head and sank her teeth into Kang's hand, biting down with everything she had, tasting the metallic tang of blood. Kang howled, instinctively pulling his hand back. That split second was all Maru needed. He didn't need a gun. He pulled a knife from his boot, a blur of silver in the dim light, and threw it. The blade buried itself in Kang's shoulder. Kang screamed, dropping his gun. Maru was on him before the weapon hit the floor. He tackled Kang, driving him into the concrete. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Maru rained blows down on his rival, his fists moving with the force of a piston. He broke Kang's nose, his jaw, his ribs. He beat him until Kang stopped moving, until the threat was neutralized, until the rage in his blood had somewhere to go. Junwoo scrambled backward, raising his gun, aiming at Maru's back. "Maru, look out," Nia screamed. Maru spun around, snatching Kang's fallen gun from the floor in one fluid motion. Junwoo fired. The bullet grazed Maru's arm, tearing through the fabric and flesh, but Maru didn't even flinch. He raised the gun and fired once. The shot echoed through the warehouse like a thunderclap. Junwoo dropped his gun, clutching his leg as he fell to the ground, screaming. Maru had shot him in the kneecap, a life-altering wound. Maru walked over to his cousin. He stood over him, the smoking gun in his hand, looking down with eyes that held no pity, only cold finality. "I told you," Maru said softly. "I told you I would balance the ledger." He kicked the gun away from Junwoo and leaned down. "You will live, Junwoo, but you will never walk without pain again. Every step you take will remind you of the day you tried to touch what was mine." Maru turned his back on him. He walked over to Nia. His hands, which had been instruments of death seconds ago, were shaking uncontrollably as he reached for the ropes binding her. He cut them loose, the knife slicing through the hemp like butter. "Nia," he whispered, his voice breaking. Nia pulled her arms free. She stood up, her legs wobbling. She looked at him, the blood on his hands, the soaking wet clothes, the bullet graze on his arm, the bruises forming on his knuckles. She took a step back. Maru froze. The rejection hit him harder than the bullet ever could. He dropped the knife. He didn't try to touch her. Instead, the dragon of soul, the man who bowed to no one, the man who ruled the city with fear, dropped to his knees on the dirty, blood-stained concrete floor. He bowed his head, his hands resting on his thighs, palms open in surrender. He looked small, broken. "I'm sorry," he choked out. The sound was wretched, torn from the bottom of his soul. "I'm so sorry, Nia." "Maru," Nia whispered, her heart twisting. "I was a fool," Maru cried, tears mixing with the rain dripping from his hair. "I was jealous. I was terrified. I saw that photo and I thought I had lost you. And instead of trusting you, I let my fear blind me. I broke my promise. I failed to protect you." He looked up at her, his dark eyes drowning in guilt and love. "Punish me, Nia. Hate me, scream at me, but please, please don't leave me again. I can't breathe without you. I tried. For 24 hours I tried and it felt like dying. I am nothing without you." Nia looked down at him. She saw the man beneath the monster. She saw the fear that drove his violence. She saw a man who had been alone his entire life, who didn't know how to hold something fragile without crushing it, but who was willing to bleed just to learn how. She saw the depth of his regret, raw and bleeding on the floor. She reached out and touched his wet hair. "You idiot," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Maru closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a starving man seeking sustenance. "You came for me," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I would burn the world for you," he vowed, pressing his face against her waist, his arms wrapping around her legs, holding on to her as if she were the only solid thing in the universe. "I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you. Every day, every hour. Just tell me you'll come home." Nia knelt down in front of him. She took his face in her hands, wiping the rain and tears and blood from his cheeks. She kissed him, soft and slow, tasting the salt and the sorrow and the promise. "Take me home, Maru," she said against his lips. Maru let out a shuddering breath, a sound of pure relief. He stood up, pulling her with him, and swept her into his arms. He carried her out of the warehouse, into the rain, leaving the wreckage of his enemies behind him. He didn't look back. He only looked at her. 6 months later, the mansion was unrecognizable. The heavy, oppressive velvet curtains were gone, replaced by sheer linen that let the golden sunlight pour in. Vases of fresh flowers, peonies and lilies, stood on every surface, filling the air with a sweet, vibrant scent that chased away the smell of stale tobacco and old ghosts. The silence that used to haunt the halls was gone, replaced by the soft hum of a home that was lived in. Nia walked down the grand staircase. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She wasn't wearing a maid's dress. She was wearing a flowing white silk robe, her hair loose and wild around her shoulders, glowing in the morning light. "Good morning, Mrs. Maru," the new head of security said as she passed, bowing deeply with genuine respect. Nia smiled. "Good morning." She walked out onto the terrace. Maru was there, standing by the railing, looking out at the gardens. He heard her footsteps and turned. The tension that used to live in his shoulders was gone. The darkness in his eyes had been replaced by a warmth that was reserved only for her. He held out his hand. She took it, and he pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her hair. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his hand drifting to her stomach, resting there with a reverence that made her heart melt. "I'm happy," she said, leaning back to look at him. Maru smiled. He leaned down and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss that still made her toes curl. As he pulled back, the sunlight caught the side of his neck. The tattoo had changed. The fierce, terrifying dragon was still there, a reminder of who he was and what he could do, but now woven through the black scales was a vibrant, intricate flower, a peony, inked in soft shading, blooming right over his pulse. The dragon was no longer alone. It was protecting something beautiful. "I have a meeting with the council today," Maru murmured, brushing his nose against hers. "But I canceled the dinner." "Why?" Nia asked. "Because," he whispered, his voice dropping to that low, possessive growl that still sent shivers down her spine. I want to spend the evening with my wife." He spun her around, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder as they looked out over their empire. "I told you once," Maru said softly, "that I would have you tonight." Nia smiled, covering his hands with hers, feeling the warmth of his skin and the beat of his heart. "And now?" she asked. Maru kissed her cheek, his grip tightening just enough to remind her that he would never let go. "Now," he whispered, "I have you forever, and forever isn't long enough." Nia leaned back into him, closing her eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart against her back. The storm was over. The dragon was tamed, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't just safe. She was home.